A woman chased me through a hardware store, demanding I help her and threatening to get me fired. Her reaction was priceless when the manager told her I do not work there. I went to Barton's Hardware on a Tuesday afternoon to buy a faucet gasket because the one in my kitchen had been leaking for a week and dripping onto the counter every single time I turned the handle. I was wearing a red flannel shirt and khaki pants, which I guess was close enough to the store uniform, because a woman appeared at the end of the plumbing aisle and locked onto me like I had a name tag pinned to my chest. She was maybe 55 with a short blonde bob, and she was holding a bathroom faucet box in one hand and her phone in the other, and she was already annoyed before she even opened her mouth. She walked directly up to me and said, "Finally, I've been waiting for 10 minutes. I need someone to explain the difference between these two faucets, and nobody in this store seems to care." I told her I didn't work there. She looked at my shirt and looked at my pants and said, "You're wearing the uniform." I told her it was a flannel shirt and I was a customer just like her. She shook her head like I was lying to her face. "I can see the shirt. I can see the pants. Stop being lazy and help me. I have a contractor coming to my house tomorrow morning and I need to know which faucet fits a 3-hole sink." I told her again that I didn't work at Barton's. I held up the gasket packaging so she could see it. She didn't look at it. She said, "I don't care what you're holding. I need help with faucets and you are going to help me right now." I put the gasket back on the shelf and started walking toward the front of the store to find an actual employee. She followed me. She followed me down the aisle and around the corner and past the paint section, talking the entire time about how I was the rudest employee she had ever encountered in any store in her entire life. She said she was going to report me. She said she had been shopping at Barton's for over 20 years and had never once been treated this poorly. I stopped walking and turned around and told her for the third time that I did not work there. I told her my name was Paul and I was a plumber and I came in on my day off to buy a gasket for my own kitchen and that the red shirt came from my own closet. She pointed her finger at me and said, "I don't care what your name is. You are in this store wearing that color and that means you help customers. That is how retail works." When I got to the front counter, there was a kid working the register who looked about 19. I asked him if there was a manager on duty. He said the manager Hank was in the back doing inventory. The woman pushed past me and slammed the faucet box on the counter and told the kid that I had refused to help her and she wanted me fired immediately. The kid looked at me and looked at her and said, "Ma'am, he doesn't work here." She slammed her palm flat on the counter and said, "I am not going to be told that one more time. He is wearing the uniform. He works here and I want to speak to whoever is in charge of this store." The kid called for Hank on the intercom. Hank came out from the back. He was a big guy in his 40s wearing an actual Barton's polo with a name tag and a lanyard around his neck. The woman pointed at me and said, "This employee has been ignoring me for 15 minutes. I want him written up and I want him fired today." Hank looked at me. I looked at Hank. Hank said, "Ma'am, that man does not work at this store." She said, "He is wearing your uniform." Hank looked at my red flannel and looked down at his own navy blue polo with the Barton's logo stitched on the chest and said, "Ma'am, our uniform is a navy polo with a name tag. That man is wearing a flannel shirt. Those are two completely different things." She looked at my shirt. She looked at his shirt. For the first time in this entire ordeal, she didn't say anything. The silence only lasted about 4 seconds. She took a breath, one long breath through her nose like she was loading up. Then she looked at Hank and said, "I don't care what color the polo is." He was standing in the plumbing aisle acting like he knew what he was doing. Either he works here or he was pretending to, and either way, that's your problem. Hank didn't blink. He said, "Ma'am, he's a customer, same as you." She didn't want to hear it, but then her voice got quieter. She reached over and picked the faucet box back up and looked down at it and said, "Fine, just that one word." Hank jumped right in. He said, "Ma'am, I'd be happy to personally help you find the right faucet. Let me walk you over to the aisle." She nodded. Hank gave me a little look like, "Go now, while you can," and I took the hint. I turned around and started walking back toward the plumbing aisle to grab my gasket off the shelf. I made it about halfway down the aisle when I heard footsteps behind me. Fast footsteps. I turned around and there she was. Again. She had the faucet box tucked under her arm and she was coming right at me like Hank had never spoken. She stopped 3 feet from me and said, "I know you work here. I don't know why everyone is covering for you, but I have been shopping at this store since before that boy at the register was born, and I know what I saw." I told her she literally just heard the manager say, "I don't work here." She said, "Managers cover for their employees all the time. That doesn't prove anything. I've worked in offices my whole career, and I know how these things go. Someone messes up and the boss smooths it over. That's exactly what's happening right now." She said it like she was the only one in the building who understood how the world really worked. Like the rest of us were children, she had to walk through it. She had an answer for everything. Every fact that proved her wrong, she just bent into some conspiracy where everyone in the building was working against her. The cashier was new and didn't know any better. The manager was protecting his employee. Even my own words about being a plumber were just part of the cover story. It was like talking to a wall, except the wall kept following me around and finding new reasons not to listen. Then she pulled her phone out of her pocket and held it up like it was a weapon. She said, "That's it. I'm calling the main office. I'm going to report every single one of you. All of you are going to hear from corporate by the end of the day." I said, "Go ahead," because at that point, what else was I supposed to say? That's when Hank appeared at the end of the aisle. He walked toward us calmly and said, "Ma'am, you are welcome to call anyone you'd like, but I need to tell you that harassing other customers in my store is something I can't allow." The word harassing hit her like she walked into a glass door. She stopped scrolling. Her thumb froze on the screen. Her whole face went tight. She looked up at Hank and said, "I am not harassing anyone. I am a customer with a legitimate complaint." Hank kept his voice steady. He said, "This man is not our employee, and I need you to leave him alone." She crossed her arms and said, "I want your district manager's name, right now." Hank walked her up to the front counter to write down the district manager's contact information on a sticky note. I went back to the shelf, grabbed my gasket, and walked up to the register. The kid started scanning it. I was about to pull my card out when I heard her voice again. She was on her phone now, walking through the paint aisle toward the front, saying loud enough for the whole store to hear, "Yes, I'm at the store right now. The manager is refusing to do anything, and one of the employees told me to my face that he doesn't work here. I'm not leaving until someone from corporate gets down here." She said it like she was reading a statement, like she had practiced it. Then something happened. She stopped walking. Her mouth was open like she was about to say something else, but instead she just stood there listening. Her face changed, not a lot, just enough. Her eyebrows pulled together, her jaw tightened. Whoever was on the other end was asking her something, and she didn't have the easy answer she expected. She turned away from us slightly. There was a long pause. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. She opened her mouth once like she was going to interrupt, but closed it again. Then without saying goodbye, she pulled the phone away from her ear and tapped the screen to hang up. She turned back and looked at me. Then she looked at Hank. Her chin was up. Her shoulders were stiff. Whatever that phone call did to her on the inside, she was not going to let it show on the outside. She said, "They're sending someone." Hank nodded. He didn't argue. He said, "That's fine, ma'am. While we wait, I need you to stop approaching other customers about this." She didn't answer. She turned without a word and walked over to a wooden bench near the front door. She sat down, put her purse on her lap, crossed her arms, and stared straight ahead at the parking lot through the glass doors. Her phone sat on top of her purse like she was ready to grab it the second it rang. She looked like someone waiting for the cavalry to arrive and prove every one of us wrong. I should have walked out right then. I had my gasket. My truck was in the parking lot, but something kept me there. She'd told everyone within earshot that I was a rude employee. She'd called someone at corporate and said my name like she knew me. I leaned against the wall near the exit and waited. I was leaning there maybe 5 minutes when the front door swung open and Tylerson walked in. He lived 4 houses down from me in our neighborhood. I'd done some work at his place before. Good guy. We weren't best friends, but we waved when we got the mail and we'd talked enough times that he knew what I did for a living. He grabbed one of the small baskets by the door and was about to head into the store when he saw me standing there against the wall like I was holding the building up. He stopped when he saw me standing there against the wall and said, "What are you doing here just standing around? Did something happen?" I looked at him and then I looked over at the woman on the bench and said, "Man, you wouldn't believe me if I told you." But I told him anyway. The short version. He listened to the whole thing and then he turned his head and looked at the woman on the bench. He looked back at me and said, "Wait, so she thinks you work here?" I said, "She doesn't just think it. She's called corporate. She wants me fired from a job I've never had." Tylerson let out a laugh, the kind that comes out before you can stop it. Then he looked at my face and the laugh stopped. He shook his head and said, "You want me to tell her I've known you for years?" I told him not yet. I wanted to see what happened when corporate called back. The woman noticed me talking to Tylerson and stood up from the bench. She walked toward us with purpose. She walked right up to Tylerson and looked him up and down and said, "Are you a manager?" Tylerson shook his head and said, "No, ma'am, I'm just a customer." She pointed at me and said, "Then you should know that this man right here refused to help me and has been lying about who he is. The staff is backing him up." Tylerson looked at her. He looked at her finger pointing at me. He looked back at her face. And then he said, "Ma'am, I know exactly who he is. He's a plumber. He fixed my water heater." He said it so plainly. No drama, no build-up, just a simple fact like he was telling her the sky was blue. I watched her face. The muscles around her mouth pulled in. Her eyes got narrower. You could see the words land and you could see her brain working in real time to find a way around them. She straightened her back and lifted her chin and said, "Well, he shouldn't have been standing in the plumbing aisle dressed like that if he didn't want to be confused for staff." Tylerson stared at her. Then he said, "Lady, it's a flannel shirt." She pressed her lips together and said, "I've made my complaint. Corporate is on their way." Then she turned around and walked straight back to the bench and crossed her arms in the exact same way and stared out the glass doors again like the last 2 minutes hadn't happened. 10 minutes went by. The phone behind the customer service desk started ringing. Hank walked over to answer it. The woman stood up from the bench. She walked toward the service desk and got close enough to lean over the counter. Hank held up one hand, palm out, and said, "Ma'am, I need you to step back, please." She did not step back. She leaned in closer and said, "If that's corporate, I need to speak to them." Hank kept the phone to his ear and said, "I'll let you know what they say." His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it now. Something that said he was done repeating himself. It took about 2 minutes total. Finally, Hank said, "Thank you. I'll pass that along," and set the phone down. He turned to face the woman. He said, "I just spoke with our district supervisor. She reviewed your complaint. She also spoke with me about what actually happened in this store today." The woman opened her mouth. Hank kept going. He said, "She wanted me to let you know that the man you've been following around this store is not and has never been an employee of this company. He is a customer who came in to buy a part." Her mouth was still open. Hank wasn't done. He said, "She also wanted me to let you know that if you continue to harass customers in this store, we reserve the right to ask you to leave and not come back. Not come back." I saw those words hit her differently than anything else anyone had said all afternoon. Her face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Shock, anger, and then something that almost looked like she was about to crack, but she pulled it together. She straightened her back and said, "I am not harassing anyone. I made an honest mistake." That's when I spoke up. I hadn't said anything in several minutes, but when she said those words, when she called it an honest mistake, something in me just couldn't let that sit there. I pushed off the wall and took a couple steps toward the service desk and said, "You didn't make a mistake. I told you 6 times I didn't work here. The cashier told you. The manager told you. You chose not to believe any of us." My voice was steady. I wasn't yelling, just facts. She turned to me and said, "I don't need a lecture from you." I looked right at her and said, "And I didn't need to be chased through a store on my day off." She didn't have a comeback, not right away. She stood there with her mouth in a thin line and then she turned back to Hank like I hadn't spoken. She planted both her hands on the counter and said, "I want to speak to her directly. Your district supervisor. I want to hear it from her myself." Hank picked up the phone again. He dialed the number from the sticky note. He said, "Hey, it's Hank again. She's requesting to speak with you directly. Would you mind if I put you on speaker?" He listened for a second and then he pressed the speaker button and set the phone down on the counter. There was a brief pause and then a woman's voice came through, clear and professional. Pooja said, "Ma'am, I've heard from my store manager and I've read your complaint. I understand you believe this man was an employee, but he is not. My team has confirmed he has no connection to our company. I'm asking you to accept that and allow our staff to help you with what you originally came in for." It was said politely, professionally, but there was no room in those words for argument. The store was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Nobody moved. The woman stood there looking down at the phone like it had personally insulted her. Then she said, "So nobody is going to apologize to me?" Her voice sounded different now, smaller, like the air was leaking out of whatever had been keeping her inflated all afternoon. Pooja's voice came back without hesitation. She said, "Ma'am, nobody did anything wrong to you." The line went quiet. Then the woman said it one more time, the thing she had been saying all afternoon. afternoon, the thing she had been using like a shield. She said, "I have been a customer of this store for over 20 years. She said it quieter than she'd said anything else all day, like it was the last card she had left. Pooja's voice came through the speaker again and she said, "And we value that, which is why I'd like Hank to personally help you with your faucet question right now if you'll let him." The woman stared at the phone. She stared at Hank. Then she turned her head and she stared at me. And I stared right back. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Every single person she had talked to, every authority she had called on, all of it had come back with the same answer. She didn't take Hank's offer. She didn't look at the plumbing aisle. She turned her whole body toward me and she said, "You enjoyed this, didn't you? You stood there the whole time and let me embarrass myself." Her voice wasn't loud anymore. It was lower now, almost private. I looked at her and I didn't look away and I said, "I told you the truth the first time you asked. You just didn't want to hear it." She flinched, small, just a pull at the corner of her mouth. Then she said the thing she had been building up to the entire time. The thing that was really underneath all the yelling and the phone calls and the demands. She said, "You could have just helped me with the faucet. You clearly know plumbing. That's all I needed." And there it was. Under all the anger and the entitlement and the refusal to be wrong, she just needed help picking out a faucet before her contractor showed up. She found a guy in the plumbing aisle and decided he was going to help her whether he wanted to or not. And when I said no, she couldn't handle it. So I looked at her and said, "You didn't ask for help. You demanded it. And then you threatened my job. A job I don't have." I said it calmly. I didn't raise my voice. I just put the facts out there one more time. And this time she didn't twist them. She just stood there and took them. Her eyes moved away from my face and she looked around the store. The kid behind the register, Tylerson with his cart, two other customers near the front who had stopped walking and were just watching. Nobody said anything. Nobody jumped in to defend her. Nobody was on her side. And I think that was the moment she finally understood. Not the facts. She probably understood the facts a long time ago. But the feeling of standing in a room full of people and knowing every single one of them watched you make a fool of yourself and not one of them is going to pretend otherwise. That feeling landed on her right then and you could see it settle over her like a weight. Her shoulders dropped about an inch. Her chin came down. She looked at the bench where her purse was still sitting and walked over and picked it up and slung the strap over her shoulder. She turned back toward the rest of us and she said, "I'm never shopping here again." She said it loud enough for everyone to hear but her. Voice didn't have the fire behind it anymore. It sounded like someone reading a line. Hank nodded once and said, "That's your choice, ma'am. I hope you find what you need somewhere else." No sarcasm, no edge, just a man doing his job. She started walking toward the exit. The store was so quiet that the sound of each step seemed too loud. She was going to make it. She was going to walk out and this whole thing was finally going to be over. But then she stopped. She stopped right in front of Tylerson. He was still standing there with his cart and she was close enough to touch him. She looked up at him and her face was tight and she said, "And you don't know the whole story." Tylerson didn't move. He didn't step back. He didn't flinch. He just looked at her the way you look at someone who keeps digging a hole they should have stopped digging a long time ago. Then he said, "I know that man fixed my water heater and he didn't charge me extra even though the part was rusted shut. I know he's one of the most patient people I've ever met and I know you owe him an apology." 3 sentences. Simple words. Nothing fancy. But those 3 sentences did something all the managers and supervisors and phone calls couldn't. They took the situation out of the world of corporate complaints and put it where it belonged. On a personal level, between 2 human beings. She stared at Tylerson for a long time. Long enough that I thought she might actually say something. Long enough that part of me actually thought she might turn around and look at me and say the words. But she didn't. She just stood there with her lips pressed together and her eyes locked on Tylerson's face. Then she broke the stare. She looked at the floor. She looked at the door. And she pushed through it with both hands and walked out into the parking lot. I watched her through the glass. She got into a silver sedan parked 4 spaces from the entrance. She didn't start the engine. She didn't put on her seatbelt. She just sat there behind the wheel with both hands in her lap, looking straight ahead through the windshield. She sat in that car for a full minute without moving. Then the brake lights came on, the reverse lights. She backed out slowly and pulled out of the lot and turned left onto the main road, and just like that, she was gone. Hank let out a long breath and shook his head and said, "Well, that was a first." I said, "Thanks for backing me up." He said, "You weren't hard to back up. You were telling the truth." The kid at the register held up the plastic bag with my gasket inside. I took it. I walked out into the late afternoon sun. The space where the silver sedan had been was empty. I climbed into my truck. I drove home. I went inside and fixed the faucet.